Welcome to the next episode of Women in STEM, the podcast that talks to women who are involved in science, technology, engineering, mathematics and medicine. Our next guest on Women in STEM is someone who calls herself the Academic Nomad. Dr. Katie Mack is an astrophysicist who is looking deep into the early universe in a bid to discover how it's all put together. She is also a passionate science communicator and, apart from regular media appearances, is very active on social media such as Twitter and Facebook. What got you into science? I've read a blog post that said that you decided you wanted to be a cosmologist at 10.
Yeah. So at least that long, I've been interested in cosmology in particular. I mean, what happened was, as a little kid, I was curious, as most little kids are. I wanted to know how everything worked, and so I did a lot of exploring, trying to understand how things were put together, how things work, the remote control on the TV, radios, stuff like that, just trying to understand everything. And at some point I heard about Stephen Hawking and black holes and space-time and all that stuff, and I just thought that was fascinating, and I wanted to understand how the universe worked, how everything works. And so I really got into astrophysics through theoretical physics, through fundamental physics. I mean, a lot of people in my field get into it through watching the stars or that kind of pictures of planets, that kind of stuff. For me, it was much more on the physics side. I wanted to do really fundamental work, answer the big questions. And so when I found out that Stephen Hawking was a cosmologist, I was like, well, that's clearly what I should do. I should be a cosmologist like Stephen Hawking, and then I'd be able to do similar things.
So you just had this fundamental need to know how things work.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to understand the basis of everything, I mean, I think a lot of people are interested in those big questions, How did the universe begin? Where did we come from? What does it all mean? How big is everything? That kind of stuff. So I was just always really fascinated by those kinds of questions, and I like the mind bending stuff, trying to think about stuff like warped space-time and time travel and the speed of light and relativity and all of that kind of stuff. It messes with your brain, and I just always really liked that feeling.
So your favorite Star Trek episodes would be the time travel episodes, then?
If they made any sense, then they tend not to.
Can time travel make sense, though? I mean, aren't we governed by the paradox?
Well, it's unclear. Like there's, so in physics, in theoretical physics, when we talk about time travel, I mean, we don't usually talk about it that way. We usually refer to something called closed time-like curves, which just means that you have a path through space-time that loops around on itself and ends up back to where you began, in space-time, not just space, right? So whether or not closed time-like curves can exist in the universe is kind of an open question, and there have been proposals for how to create those through things like zipping between two cosmic strings and, sort of weird stuff like that, trying to find strange configurations of space-time that would allow that. But there's also been hypotheses that there's some kind of fundamental principle of physics that just will never allow that to happen. And it's kind of unclear. I mean, the thing is that practically, in terms of stuff we can actually do, with what we understand about the universe, we can't possibly make any of these configurations that would allow closed time-like curves. But even sort of theoretically, it's not clear that they would work, because there just might be some kind of property of the universe that makes that impossible. We don't know.
All right, so you also have a focus on dark matter. That seems to be the other topic that most people are asking you questions about. What attracts you to dark matter?
Well, that's my main research topic at the moment. Dark matter is cool because it's a mystery that's a lot more accessible than some of the other mysteries in fundamental physics in some ways. So we know that most of the matter in the universe is some kind of invisible stuff, and we call it dark matter. We don't know what it's made of. But we can study a lot about dark matter. We can figure out where it is. We can figure out how much of it is out there. We know a lot about its behavior in terms of, how it interacts with other particles. Well, we know how it doesn't interact with other particles. We have a lot of sort of limits on its interactions. We know how it interacts gravitationally with itself and with other matter. And so we're able to really probe it very well, and we have a few very promising methods for trying to figure out what it is. We have dark matter detectors that are these underground experiments that wait for dark matter particles to bump into things in the detector, and so far that's all really inconclusive, but we might be able to find it that way somehow, someday. Then we also have indirect detection, where we look for signatures of dark matter doing weird stuff in the sky. And then we have collider experiments, where we try to make dark matter in the lab. And so we have, several different approaches to try to understand this problem. And we're learning a lot about, what dark matter could be. And so it's a good place to be at the moment, because there's a lot of creativity in how to think about, what dark matter could be doing in various places and times in the universe. And there's a lot of opportunity to do new kinds of experiments or new kinds of measurements to try to understand dark matter. And so that's nice. I mean, if you compare that to something like dark energy, which is some mysterious stuff that makes up most of the universe, it's whatever. Dark energy is whatever is making the universe accelerate in its expansion, and we don't know what that is. At the moment, there's very little we can test about dark energy. I mean, we can test the history of the expansion. We can try and look for changes in how dark energy has acted over the billions of years of the universe. We can try and find differences in how it acts at different parts of the universe, although we've seen nothing to indicate that it's not completely uniform. So, so dark energy is, in some senses, a bigger mystery, because it's more of the universe, and it's really important for how the universe is evolving. But there's not as much, there's not as much to approach it with. We don't have as many handles on it. Whereas dark matter, we know a lot about how it's distributed, what it's doing, and we have a lot of different ways to attack the problem. So it's a nice area to work in, because there's a lot to do.
All right, so Stowell, what's the Stowell Gold Mine Dark Matter Direct Detection Project?
So this is a cool project. This is a dark matter direct detection project that I'm involved in. Mm-hmm. And what it is we are putting together a detector to put in the bottom of a mine in Stawell in rural Victoria. And the hope is to see interactions inside the detector from dark matter bumping into some part of the detector. Now, the important thing about this experiment is that it's sort of two parts. So we're gonna have one detector in Stawell here in Australia, and then we're gonna have another detector in Italy, in the Gran Sasso underground mine, underground physics lab. And the idea is to see if both detectors see the same thing or different things. And there's this other experiment that's been going on for a long time called DAMA/Libra, and that experiment claims to have seen signatures of dark matter interactions, and it claims to see signatures that change over the course of a year. So they have more interactions in around June and fewer interactions around December. And that would make sense if dark matter is doing some of the interacting, and it's being modulated by how the Earth is moving around the sun and how the sun is moving around the galaxy. And so we would expect from those motions that you'd have more interactions in June and fewer in December. Mm-hmm. But it could just be a seasonal thing. There are a lot of backgrounds that could vary with the seasons. And so if it's a seasonal thing, then you expect the opposite modulation in the southern hemisphere. Whereas if it's really something extraterrestrial, if it's really dark matter, we'd see the same peak in June and trough in December. So that's the main thing.
I do like the idea of seasonal dark matter.
Well, it wouldn't be the dark matter as seasonal. It would be it would just be that, like, maybe the rock, when it's warmer, has, is putting out more neutrons for some reason. And that would give you a background that you couldn't distinguish from dark matter interactions. So there's stuff like that could happen. But if it's dark matter, the reason that you get more interactions in June and fewer in December is that, so the Earth is moving around the sun and the sun is moving around the galaxy. And so sometimes the Earth is moving sort of more into the dark matter wind and sometimes more out of it, just because of sort of how we're moving through this sort of sea of dark matter. And that would give you this annual modulation that experiment seems to have, claims to have seen. And it's really unclear what's going on with that, because other experiments have not seen the same modulation, but they haven't been using the same target exactly. And there's reasons to do, a very similar experiment in two places, one in the south, and see what happens.
So you're aiming to replicate, so you can confirm, or basically confirm the results, or maybe say the results haven't been confirmed.
Yeah, basically. I mean, we're also going to sort of do our own kind of experiment to, we might see something different. We're going to have a very sensitive detector, so that might give us an ability to see something unique. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the biggest motivation for this experiment is that there's this other experiment that's been going on for something like 10 years, has seen a signal, and nobody's been able to say exactly what it is.
All right, so leaving aside the science part, you're also big for science communication.
Yeah.
You're on Twitter, you've got the Pint in the Sky YouTube channel. When is the next Pint in the Sky due out?
It's variable, because so I do those videos with Alan Duffy, and he and I are both really often traveling, and then he's really busy and I'm really busy, and we're not both at the same university anymore. And so, finding times to get together and shoot a video is challenging. And so we just put one out a week or so ago, and that one's up now, so that should be something to look at for the moment. But we're hoping to do another one in the next couple of weeks, and then once we film it, we have to get it edited, and we have a new editor who's doing great things, and hopefully it'll turn around pretty quickly. But for a long time we had issues where we had trouble finding time to shoot the things, and then we had some problems with getting them edited, and it just there are delays.
Oh, trust me, I know all about delays in that.
Yeah.
So what is it about science comms and this outreach that attracts you? Why do you do this?
I mean, like, I guess part of it is just I really enjoy talking about science. I think it's a fun thing to share these big ideas with people, and also, like, I'm a publicly funded scientist, and at some point all this stuff that the taxpayers are paying for, they need to know what it is, and I can help that happen. I can share that with them, and so that's nice. But yeah, I mean, part of it also is that I think a lot of people don't really have an understanding of how science works or how scientists do their jobs. Just because it's not depicted well in the media usually. Movies and books and stuff, TV shows usually show scientists as these sort of this sort of mad scientist stereotype, or just really socially inept, sloppy people who are locked in a lab all day.
The Big Bang Theory of scientists.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And so I think a lot of times people don't really have a good understanding of how that works. And also a lot of times when science is reported, it's reported as, here's a big breakthrough. We've discovered a thing, we're done. We've sorted that out. And I think that is also really misleading, because it makes it hard to see how science progresses and how we test our theories, and how it's just always a work in progress. And so one of the things I really like about social media in particular as a form of outreach is that it allows me as a scientist to let people in on what I do and how I do it, and how science really works. So it doesn't look like, just people making declarations from on high. It's really, people get to see that process. So I think it's helpful to show that side of how science is working, and to let people have a better relationship with both science and scientists, and that that'll allow people to better evaluate claims about science in the media, and to have a better perspective on what they should or shouldn't believe when they're presented with science, in things like that are relevant to things like policy.
So one of the other things is you call yourself an academic nomad. Now,
Yeah.
You've mentioned it already that you and Alan Duffy can't get together so much anymore because you're both traveling. Cosmology and astrophysics is a global field. Does this mean you have to travel a lot?
Yes. So compared to other astronomers or other astrophysicists, I probably travel a bit more than average, especially for a postdoc. But even if you try to avoid it, usually you have to go to a couple of conferences a year, and those conferences may or may not be in the country you're living in. And if you're in Australia, a lot of times the big conferences are overseas, so you have to travel for that. And conferences are really useful. I mean, sometimes they're useful because you get to present your work and show it to the community, and that helps people exchange ideas. But also they can be very inspiring. You can learn about what other people are doing, and you can use that information in your own research, and also just kind of get it's stimulating to see what else is happening, and to talk to people. Like, you get a lot of good ideas just by talking to people. So there's conferences, and then there's sometimes people are in collaborations that are big international collaborations. They have to go to these collaboration meetings. And then there's if you have someone you're working with who's overseas, which happens a lot, then you might have to go visit their institution and talk to them about the research in person, because it's just a lot more efficient than doing it via email or whatever. So there are a lot of reasons that we travel a lot. And for me also, I find that I find it very valuable to talk to people in person about research, and I get a lot of good ideas that way. And because of the work I do, it's helpful for me to have a very broad perspective on what's going on both in astronomy and in fundamental physics. And so I find it very useful to go around and hear a lot of talks on a lot of different topics and talk to people about their research. So for me, I probably travel more than most, partially because I find it very useful for getting ideas.
All right, just one more question, and then I'll let you go.
Okay.
What would be your ultimate discovery? What would be the most important thing that you'd want to pull out from your career as an astrophysicist?
Well, I think the obvious thing is, if I could find out what dark matter is made of, right? Like, that would be the most important thing. I think for the work that I'm doing now, one of the things I'm thinking about now is how dark matter interactions could affect the first stars and galaxies. And so if I could find some signature that we could look for with telescopes that would really show that dark matter is doing a particular thing at early times, and then that tells us more about what dark matter is, that would be a really important, useful thing. So I mean, the kind of work that I do is very much in the sort of space between theory and observation. So I talk to the theorists, I find out what the big questions are in theory right now, what the hypotheses are, and then I talk to the observers and I find out like what they can do with the telescopes and what they could see, and then I try and find a way to connect those. So I try and say, if we do this kind of observation, then we can test this theory, and then we'll learn something about the model and have a better understanding of this physics. So it's that kind of in-between space, and that means that the sort of most important discoveries that I could make would be predictions for how to test a theory with a telescope, basically, or with some experiment. And so that's kind of the space in which I'm working, and that's the kind of thing that I really try to do. I try to find really unique signatures. I try and predict really unique signatures of this sort of fundamental physics stuff in in future observations.
Big thanks to Dr. Katie Mack for taking the time to chat. If you want to know more about Dr. Mack, then you can read her profile on womeninscienceaust.org, or you can search for her occasional YouTube series, Pint in the Sky. Alright, the intro and outro music for this episode is again Coco Cora by Texas Radio Fish and is licensed Creative Commons by attribution. You can find it at dig.ccmixter.org. Thanks for listening, and keep an ear out, we should have more episodes up soon.